What's up? This video is about organizations that regulate Wi-Fi and develop its standards. Let's talk about who follows whom, who is responsible for what, who is the authority, and how the use of radio frequencies is regulated, where what is allowed, where what is prohibited, and how to deal with all of this. This is the first video, and here it would be correct to consider the word Wi-Fi itself. There is an opinion that this is abbreviated as wireless fidelity. There is no exact decoding, but this is not significant at all. It is more important to understand that the term Wi-Fi is more marketing than technical. It is written capital W, small I, hyphen, capital F, small I. Be a competent engineer, write without mistakes. Officially, Wi-Fi is called 802.11 Wireless Local Area Network Technology. As you know, everything that begins with 802 dot is produced by folks from the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, IEEE. These guys are developing the main 802.11 standard, a huge document of more than 4,000 pages and many amendments to it that from time to time become a part of the main standard. In addition to IEEE, there's a gang called Wi-Fi Alliance, or WECA, Wireless Ethernet Compatibility Alliance. They do own the Wi-Fi trademark. Its champions are working on compatibility of the entire variety of wireless devices from different manufacturers. This is achieved by the certification for vendor equipment carried out by Wi-Fi Alliance. You can see here how it looks like and how many elements it includes. Also present at the party is IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force, which issues our favorite RFCs for all possible occasions. So once again, IEEE standardizes radio stuff like modulation and coding schemes, channel width, spatial streams, multiple receive transmit in different directions, guard interval values, and much more. These parameters can have different values, some are smaller, some are larger, some work more efficiently due to greater consumption of resources, some are less effective but more economical. The IETF releases its technology specifications, and so do other organizations. Manufacturers produce their equipment that supports all these well-known technologies to varying degrees. Wi-Fi Alliance selects part, this is important, not all, but the part that is most reasonable to use on the market. A part of the stuff that those smart guys on the left have come up with is grouped into a list of requirements for compliance with certifications, for example 802.11n or 802.11ac. And if the device supports the required set of functions, it is considered certified. After which the manufacturer places a certificate on the box stating that certification has been passed. Users don't have to delve into the details, they just need to remember what's the last trendy thing that came out, which Wi-Fi is 6? I'll take that. Each generation under some number corresponds to the 802.11 standard with a letter or two, and you can delve endlessly into the details of their differences. In addition to compliance with a certain generation of 802.11 technology, the Wi-Fi Alliance also certifies other aspects, such as security, this is WPA Wireless Protected Access, with numbers 1, 2, 3, or peer-to-peer technologies for communicating devices directly with each other without using a router or access point. This is used for the Internet of Things, image casting, printers, cameras, game consoles, and so on. These were organizations that developed technologies and standards for the compatibility of equipment, one way or another, related to Wi-Fi. Now let's talk about organizations that regulate the use of radio frequencies. There is a hierarchy in global radio frequency management. The UN, United Nations, has tasked the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, about this matter. It has a division, ITUR, which deals with radio communications. ITUR divided all countries into 3 regions. The first, Europe, Africa, Middle East, former USSR, and Mongolia. The second, Americas. And the third, most Asian countries, Oceania, Australia. A bit like the division of zones between regional IP address registrars. And within each country, spectrum use is regulated by local government organizations. For example, in the European Union, this matter is being resolved by the European Telecommunications Standardization Institute, ETSI, and in the USA, FCC. Federal Communications Commission. We will consider these two further. But first, let's take a look where this Wi-Fi is located in the frequency spectrum. Wi-Fi operates mainly in two frequency bands, 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz. These bands are included into the portion of the spectrum that is used in radio communications, including television, cellular communications, FM radio, etc. Usually, these frequencies cannot be used for free. You need to pay, get a license. This is expensive. Wi-Fi operates in the unlicensed frequencies. Everyone can use it. The ITU has defined three frequency bands for industrial, scientific, or medical purposes, ISM. The American FCC allows their use without a license. These are three sections of the spectrum, somewhere around 900 MHz, 2.4 GHz, and 5 GHz. Wi-Fi operates at 2 GHz and 5 GHz, but Wi-Fi is not the only one that uses them. Any industrial or medical equipment that emits electromagnetic waves does so at these frequencies, and not necessarily for data transfer like Wi-Fi. First, let's look at the 2.4 GHz range. It has 14 channels with a width of 20 MHz, using the old spread spectrum technology 22 MHz. The channel is identified by a number and its corresponding center frequency. The central frequencies are separated by an interval of 5 MHz, except for the last one, which is a little further. But channel 14 is not allowed by all local regulators. To work in 2 GHz, the access point selects an available channel and all its clients will work on it. There are three non-overlapping channels in the 2 GHz band, 1st, 6th, and 11th. It is possible to use 4 channels, but this is a very specific case where the interference losses caused by the small overlap of the channels used are less significant than the benefit of one additional channel. And this trick cannot be done in the North American region, and that's why. In North America, 2 GHz only has 11 channels available. In Europe there are more, 13. So if in an exam question you had to answer about the number of available channels in 2 GHz, the correct answer may depend on the region. Here is a picture. If channel aggregation is used, then the maximum width for 2 GHz is recommended to be no more than 40 MHz. You won't be able to use 80 or 160. The 2 GHz band is overwhelmed by a large number of devices that use it. These are not only laptops and smartphones, but also everything that works via Bluetooth, cordless phones, headsets, peripherals. Even USB 3 interfaces and microwave ovens make some noise here. Coupled with the small number of available channels, this range has become extremely unattractive due to high channel utilization and interference. But it is important to understand that 2 GHz channels are not somehow defective or faulty in themselves. They are simply overloaded. The modern standard Wi-Fi 6, for example, fully supports working in 2 GHz band, and all its advantages will work in the same way as in the 5 GHz band, provided that the client supports Wi-Fi 6, of course. But in fairness, let's say now the 2 GHz band is used practically as best effort. A completely normal option is to turn it off completely and leave only where legacy clients are expected. This is especially true in a non-office environment, hospitals, factories. The recommendation for an office environment is this: corporate SSID only in 5 GHz, guest SSID in both bands. Making a separate SSID for 5 GHz and a separate for 2 GHz is an outdated recommendation from the days when a 2 GHz network was made for data transmission and another network in 5 GHz was made for voice and video. You should design a Wi-Fi network guided by the principle: if 5 GHz works fine, then 2 GHz will also. We will talk another time about the differences in standards, wavelength, and penetrating power, and accordingly the cell size at the same transmit power level, but we have already digressed. Let's return to the channels and regulation. There are significantly more channels in the 5 GHz band. The channels are divided into numbered groups, which are called unii, Unlicensed National Information Infrastructure. They are determined by the FCC, government regulator in the US. For Wi-Fi, 4 groups are used: the first, 2 second ones, and the third. Here in the figure, the channel numbers are not entirely correct. The last two now include one additional channel each: 144 in Unit 2 Extended and 165 in Unit 3. The 165 was added in 2014. The 144 was added in the 802.11ac standard, which is Wi-Fi 5. It came out in 2013. According to some data, channel 144 is available in the USA but not yet in Europe, but this is not for sure. So now the list of channels looks like this. Be aware that clients released before 2014 most likely do not support channels 144 and 165. This can cause problems if you use some old devices, for example barcode scanners, or if CEO of your company walks around with an ancient mobile phone that he doesn't want to change for anything. In this picture you see two highlighted ranges: wide, DFS dynamic frequency selection, this is the entire Unit 2, and channels from 120 to 128. Let's focus on this feature. DFS. These are channels that are used by the state for all sorts of government needs: army, police, aviation, satellite communication, weather radars. And for this reason, the state says that these channels cannot be used for your Wi-Fi bullshit. After some time, they allowed it, but on the condition that if they suddenly need it, Wi-Fi would not interfere with the radar. This illustrates well the whole approach to DFS. Wi-Fi should not be a problem for the radar and not vice versa. Before selecting a DFS channel, the access point must listen to it for a minute to ensure that the channel is not currently occupied by the radar. This procedure is called CAC, Channel Availability Check. It sounds discouraging. However, modern access points can listen to the DFS channel using one of several receiving antennas while continuing to serve clients normally with the rest. If, while working on a DFS channel, a radar suddenly appears, then all Wi-Fi devices must be transferred to another channel. To do this, they are given 10 seconds. The access point informs clients about it using the frame code CSA, Channel Switch Announcement. The new channel may be in the DFS range. After leaving a DFS channel, devices cannot return to it for 30 minutes. This period is called non-occupancy time. So note, DFS implies certain procedures and rules, timers, message types. Devices must be able to process them. It feels like it should be described somewhere in one place, does it? And now there's a sudden turn. DFS is not specific frequencies, not certain channel numbers, not individual pieces of spectrum. DFS is a functional, and this functionality is described in the .11h standard, together with TPC, Transmit Power Control. And to use DFS channels, devices must comply with the .11h standard. But which channels are DFS, that is, support for this functionality is mandatory for their operation, is decided by local radio frequency regulators in each country separately. When I say DFS channels, this is not entirely correct. It would be correct channels that require DFS support to work on them, but in most regions these channels are the same, and for simplicity we will just say DFS channels. But even in our FCC and ETSI, there may be a difference in the channel numbers that require DFS. Here is a drawing for you. In the left column there are three regulators in the regions USA, Europe and UK. So for the Unit 3 range in the USA it does not require DFS support, but in the other two it does. I don't know how old is the picture, maybe something has changed now. As you can see, the requirements apply not only to specific radio frequencies, but also to transmit power. Many factors are taken into account: where the device will operate, indoors or outdoors, and whether it will be a point-to-point connection. For such, there are slightly fewer restrictions. We'll talk about power some other time. Let's figure out the channels for now. For all these regions, DFS includes TDWR range, highlighted yellow in FCC. Channels from 120 to 128 have even stricter regulations. They operate Doppler weather radar and their use was completely prohibited. Later, however, they allowed it, but equipment manufacturers still avoid working in these channels, so it is recommended to leave them turned off everywhere. In Europe, regulations of these channels is even stricter, and before using them, a device must listen to them for 10 minutes instead of 1. A good example of how differently regulators in different countries determine the use of frequencies. But the limitations associated with DFS do not end here. When a client connects to Wi-Fi, it performs a scanning procedure, detecting networks available for connection. This happens when you click on the Wi-Fi icon or during roaming. Scanning can be active. The client sends probe requests to everyone who can hear it. It is faster and can be done at any time. The second type of scanning is passive. The client listens to beacon frames that are sent by access points every 100 milliseconds by default. It takes more time. The problem here is that DFS channels cannot be actively scanned. This can play a particularly important role during roaming, when the client moves from one access point to another, especially during some kind of a Zoom call. In addition, the channels are scanned in the specific order, and DFS channels in the US are at the bottom of the list. Here in the figure, channels from 116 to 132 are highlighted green, but this is an error. The important thing is that unii 3 channels are less strictly regulated in the US than in Europe, and for the FCC they are almost equivalent to unii 1 channels. It's strange that unii 2 from 52 to 64, although DFS, are scanned without any special features in the usual manner. But unii 2 extended will be scanned only when the remaining channels in the 5 GHz band and all channels in 2 GHz have been scanned as many as 5 times. How do you like that? As a result, without modern methods that simplify the whole matter, the device can wait up to a whole minute before it switches to a channel in the DFS range from 100 to 144. It might look like, well, what can we talk about? Turn them off and that's it. They will only cause problems, right? Well, not that much. Cisco indeed often recommends avoiding DFS channels because of those shortcomings. But firstly, these are rather outdated horror stories for devices produced earlier, and the mechanisms are now used to simplify scanning quite well. Secondly, these recommendations are more likely to apply to the North American region, because there are no problems using unii 3 channels. But in Europe unii 3 is not very clear. At first it was prohibited. Then somewhere it seemed to be allowed under an inexpensive license, and recently many countries opened it for unlicensed use in Wi-Fi. Thank you very much. So what the hell is it in the end? Where it's possible, where it's not? How to understand it? Not clear. What is clear is that in ETSI regions the use of DFS may be more attractive than unii 3, with the exception of course for channel from 120 to 128. There is Doppler sitting there with his fucking radar, you don't want to go there. So what to do with all of this? Turn them on, turn them off. Rather turn them on if there are no obvious problems with them. Disabling DFS makes sense when there is an airport, military base, weather station, or for example a seaport nearby. However, even in this case you should not turn off all DFS channels at once. The chances are that the radar only works on some certain channels, and by excluding them from the channel plan, you can safely use the rest. In other cases, the shortcomings of DFS are eliminated by efficient roaming mechanisms and other modern features built into Wi-Fi standards. And in high-density scenarios, with a lot of clients and a large number of access points in a small area of space, there is likely no way without DFS, as in the case when aggregated channels are used. There will be very few of them without DFS, even at 40 MHz. If the access point notices a working radar, it will be visible in the logs, so when DFS is triggered, it will not go unnoticed for you. Well, let's return to the channels in the 5 GHz band. With DFS and weather radar it's clear. For some reason unii 2 ranges are not named the same everywhere. In Cisco it is unii 2 without a letter and unii 2 extended. CWNP, this is a company that carries out vendor-independent certifications and only about Wi-Fi, calls them unii 2A and unii 2C respectively. As a result, we now say that there are 25 non-overlapping channels in the 5 GHz band, 4 in unii 1, 5 in unii 3, and 16 in the DFS range unii 2, 4 from 52 to 64, and 12 from 100 to 144. Here they are, from left to right: 4, another 4, 12, and 5. In Europe, channel 144 is prohibited for unlicensed use in Wi-Fi, and the entire unii 3 range requires DFS support. but may depend on the specific country. Here is another picture. It is only for the FCC, but in more detail, and it is newer. Plus, the bands shown are those that were not approved for use in wireless local area networks, UNI 2B and UNI 4. You should know that they exist. FCC in UNI 3 does not require DFS. Here is another one. There are 5 and 2 GHz bands. There is Australia. Channel 144 is marked as prohibited only in the UK. And Wikipedia, how would we skip this? Perhaps it contains the most up-to-date information. Plus, there are links to documents from regulators. 144 is already marked as permitted in both the UK and Europe, but is prohibited in Turkey and South Africa and China. And UNI 3 is also green for Europe, marked SRD, short range distance. This is a small amendment from the ETSI, which allows the use of the frequency for a number of purposes, including Wi-Fi, but with less power. Channels 144 and UNI 3 were allowed in Europe quite recently, and in many places on the internet they are marked in the old way as not supported. But it was remembering that vendors like to play it safe and trim the list of channels used to avoid accidental violation of restrictions. Even if 144 and UNI 3 are officially approved, it will be a long time before manufacturers include their support on hardware. In the main standard 802.11/2020, it is the actual one at the time of the recording, there is Appendix E with tables. There, the allowed channels are divided into classes with sets of restrictions. So here 144 and UNI 3 are allowed for America. And for Europe there is no 144, but there is UNI 3, and the set of restriction field is empty for them, just like for UNI 1. But here is the operating class for UNI 3, 125. Let's now look at the table E4. These classes are described there. Yeah, here are the restrictions, okay. Then let's go to the adjacent Appendix D to table D2. Here they are both. License extent behavior, use EIRP for VHF. We do not need to delve into them. We just want to figure out what's going on with channels 144 and the UNI 3. Is it possible or not? The answer is, according to the 2020 year standard, 144 is not allowed in Europe. The rest is permitted in both the USA and Europe. Here is an example from a newer textbook. They already write here that 144 is allowed in Europe. For some reason UNI 3 is missing in Europe, but this is not true. Feels like it's all a bit complicated, right? It would be just great if manufacturers themselves dealt with all this crap with restrictions, would it? Good news! The fact is that Cisco, just for instance, not only them, produces access points of different models to work in different regions. And on these models, the ability to operate at frequencies prohibited in the region for which access point was produced is disabled by hardware. Can you imagine that? Even more, they will also tell you which model to choose for which country. Let's take a look. Let's say you are about to open an office in the USA, and you know that according to technical parameters, points 1832 will suit you. You are going to the Cisco Wireless LAN Compliance Lookup service. There, you select the country and the model. In response, they will tell you which regulatory domain you need to choose. Here it is domain B. The regulatory domain is always included into a part number of access points. When you come to a Cisco partner to order 1832 access points, they will definitely ask you which exact model do you need. Here's how it looks like from the seller's point of view. Access points for domain H, domain K, N, or any others are separate part numbers. You always need to know which one to order. There is a section in the access points datasheet that describes what frequencies and how many channels the access point, 1832 in our case, supports for different regulatory domains. We found out that we need B, and here we are. We see 25 channels in the 5 GHz all of which are allowed by the FCC. For Europe, domain E is used. There are much fewer channels there. By the way, here is a life hack for you. To convert a frequency of a 5 GHz channel to a channel number, you need to subtract 5000 from a center frequency and divide the remainder by 5. For example, let's take the very last channel in the European domain, 5700 MHz. Minus 5000 is 700, divide by 5, we get approximately something around near 140. This is the channel number. You need to be careful with these differences in domain-supported frequencies when you want to send access points from an office that is closing to another country. Perhaps in this country clients use frequencies that are not supported by your access point. If you install them there will be a lot of problems. Another place where in Cisco you can see which channels are allowed in which country is, in fact, the controller, in which we set one or more country codes. To do this, on Area OS controllers, use the Show Country Channels command. We look at the 802.11a section and read the channel numbers from top to bottom, one column, one number. An asterisk or letter A means that according to the information on the device, the channel can be used in that country. It may vary based on a model and software version. Here you can see that in the UK you can't use either the 144 or Unit 3 channels, but in the USA you can. Here the channels are the same in Germany and France. Also, nothing higher than 140 is allowed. The same thing in Poland and Ukraine. Russia has its own regulatory domain, R, in which Unit 3 is allowed. In Brazil, the domain is Z, which has the same channels. In Serbia it's like in Europe, but in Argentina it's very different. Or here are India and China. Unit 2C is not in a high esteem there, but in India you can go even higher than 165. These were channels on access points and controllers. On some client devices we can also find out the supported frequencies. Here's a MacBook, for example. In the System Information menu there is a Network section and Wi-Fi item there. It says directly here, Locale, ETSI, supported channels, here is the list. What is there about channels after 140, by the way? There is no 144, but Unit 3 is present and even 165. A situation may happen when an employee arrives on a business trip with a laptop manufactured for work in another country and therefore on a different list of channels. If an access point operates on a channel that the device doesn't support, then the client will not be able to connect to the access point. In order for this locale to be updated, you should change the country settings and the item about wireless in the menu along the path on the screen. This might make it work. Well, that's all about Uni 1 to 3 ranges. I hope it's clear. However, there are some others. Here you can see Uni 4 with channels from 169 to 181. Check this out. In 2013, the FCC added two Uni bands. 2B, we saw it is prohibited for Wi-Fi, and Uni 4, 75 MHz of spectrum just above the Uni 3 band. Uni 4 was allocated for a separate technology 802.11p DSRC, Dedicated Short-Range Communications, or ITS, Intelligent Transportation System. In 2019, the FCC allowed the lower 45 MHz of this band to be taken and used for Wi-Fi. The top 30 MHz was allocated for radio communications between vehicles and anything, for example traffic lights. All this stuff about vehicles is united in the WAVE technology group, wireless access in vehicular environments, a separate, highly specialized area. Potentially the Uni 4 range could offer 3 additional channels for Wi-Fi, but this idea has not gained widespread acceptance, and you should not expect support for Wi-Fi in it from any manufacturer. But where we can expect new channels available for Wi-Fi is at 6 GHz. Wi-Fi 6 supports work in 2 and 5 GHz band, and it also has an extension Wi-Fi 6E, which provides the ability to work in 6 GHz band. And there are as many as 59 channels. Wow, that's amazing! But don't rush to grab your dipole vibrator. There is something you should know. The fact is that Wi-Fi 6E is not backward compatible with previous standards. This means that only the latest devices with full support of Wi-Fi 6 will be able to join a network where Wi-Fi 6E is enabled, and there are still not that many of them. And you also need to build this 6E network on equipment that can handle Wi-Fi 6. So it will be a long time before 6 GHz channels are implemented everywhere, and it's unlikely that you'll ever be able to give up the 2 and 5 GHz bands. But it looks very promising. Plenty of channels, no radars or microwavers, and the lack of support for the old shit is only beneficial because old slow clients are always a pain in the ass for all other devices. You remember that our Wi-Fi is half duplex, do you? Here you go. The 6 GHz band is divided into 4 uni ranges from 5th to 8th. In the US, all will be at your disposal, taking into account the restriction of regulatory organizations. Nothing special for an office environment. In Europe, however, they didn't aim at all 1200 MHz and started separately with Uni 5 and its 24 channels. But everything will change 1,000 times. Let's see how it goes. Okay, that's finally it. Thanks for watching. I hope you will find this useful. Have a good one.